Interesting thing to me is that this development of Mahayana Buddhism took place in northwest India mostly in the first 2 centuries AD, and those are precisely the centuries of the development of Christianity. And the idea of the Bodhisattva is the one who, out of his realization of transcendence, participates in the world. That's the idea of the Christ in his love for the world, coming to be crucified, participating in the crucifixion intentionally, with joy. What's the imitation of Christ? The imitation of Christ is joyful participation in the sorrows of the world, if you read it this way. So there's a wonderful dialogue here. When you think of the Christ in the way of the Buddha, these are 2 folk manifestations of the same elementary idea. The lesson the Buddha tells you is, you're it, all right? What's the imitation of Christ? Joyful participation. Come into this crucifixion with joy, not fear, not desire, and it's a rapture. That's the story there. Now, many rituals associated with war, for instance, in the old times, had to do with getting the warriors into what's known as a berserk attitude, where you go into the pain of the war with rapture. You're wild participating in this thing. That is a religious approach to war. And so we have the 2 Buddhisms, the Buddhism of the ascetic effort and the Buddhism of the joyful participation. The little ferry boat, the big ferry boat. This is big ferry boat stuff. We're there. And the other one is more little ferry boat. You're working hard. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, some people like to work hard. So it's the worst thing you can do to tell, geez, you're having a ball. No, I'm having a terrible time. And that's the whole sense of my life. Another person requires another doctrine. Now, this is Bodh Gaya. This is the actual tree under which the Buddha sat. And so we can concretize the whole thing. And we can go to Bodh Gaya, you see? And there's a big temple that's been built there. And these are the stages of the heavens. Now, the idea is in reincarnation. Reincarnation is the counterpart in the Orient of purgatory in the West. When you die and are so bounded by your ego and its intentions and desires and fears that you can't open to the transcendent revelation of the beatific vision, which would annihilate egoism, then you have to be purged, purgatory, of your ego. And this is a kind of postgraduate course that is given to you in a good Christian tradition. In the Oriental tradition, you would be reborn to have the same, another chance. And so you keep getting reborn until you are cleaned of ego. But in between incarnations, you will go either to a heaven or to a hell, depending on how you behaved. If you responded as well as you could to the disciplines of your life, you will go to a heaven for which you are ready. Or if you resisted, you will be sent to a hell where real tough deities will smash you up and make you sorry for yourself. Now, the heaven that you go to will be appropriate to your condition. Nobody is judging you and saying you've got to go to this heaven or to that hell. Your own psyche has a kind of specific gravity that carries you just to the right heaven. Now, if you're ready for rock and roll, it won't assign you to a chamber music concert. The heaven that you will enjoy will be appropriate to your readiness. And the heavens grade up. The lower heavens are those of erotic delights of one kind or another. And next up are some of philosophical contemplation and so forth. And finally, up above, it's the transcendence, the meditation on the transcendent and so forth and so on. And finally, you dissolve. So that's the world mountain. And beneath it is the abyssal hells, also graded. Dante's Divine Comedy gives us exactly that. The difference between Dante's hell and the hell of Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas' hell is just sheer punishment. Dante's hell is appropriate to the way you lived your life, and his heaven also. So the future transcendent is simply a reflection of your present earthly character and needs and so forth.
For Campbell, the similarities between Buddhism and Christianity are too great to ignore. Purgatory is equivalent to reincarnation. The Buddha's joyful participation in the sorrows of the world is reflected in Christ's intentional participation in the crucifixion. It's obvious to Joe the difference between Christianity and Buddhism is not so much in the story, but in how we see ourselves in the story. The highest realization in Buddhism is one of identification with the Buddha. All babies are Buddha babies. They just don't know it. This prime realization in Buddhism is the prime heresy in Christianity. The good Christian is not God. He serves God. We have two contrary ways of reading myths here. One gives us a myth of identification, and the other a myth of relationship. But however distinct the Buddhist and Christian traditions are at their core, neither developed in the isolation of a closed society. Each was susceptible to the influence of outside forces, and each influenced surrounding cultures.
500 BC